The crack of electricity still echoes in my head. 1 second my wife was standing beside the car, catching her breath, one hand over her belly, 7 months pregnant, and the next she was on the ground shaking. The man holding the taser wasn't a cop. He was a volunteer from our HOA with a $40 gadget and an ego big enough to believe it made him law enforcement. What he didn't know was that I'm a federal judge, and he had just crossed the wrong man's line. My name's Nathaniel Cross. I've sentenced corrupt officials, ruled on civil rights cases, and seen power abused in ways that would make most people sick. But nothing prepared me for watching my wife collapse on the same bricks where my mother planted the first garden beds of this neighborhood. That garden was her legacy, and Amara and I moved here to honor it. After years of failed IVF and prayers whispered in sterile rooms, we finally got a heartbeat. We thought we were coming home to peace. Instead, we walked right into a dictatorship wrapped in the word community. The guy's name was Marcus Trent, HOA security liaison, self-appointed sheriff of Fairbrook Glen. He said Amara was obstructing the fire lane. She'd been parked for 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Dizzy, holding her belly, trying to breathe. I told him to step back. He barked, "She's in violation," and before I could blink, he pulled the trigger. The sound hit first, then the smell of burned fabric, and then Amara's body hit the ground. When I knelt beside her, her pulse was barely there. He stood over us, smug, already trying to justify it. She resisted instructions. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "You're not law enforcement. You're a volunteer with a toy." He froze when I added, "You just violated Section 203 of the Residential Use of Force Statute. This isn't your jurisdiction, it's mine." The paramedics arrived. They said the baby's heart rate was unstable. Lopez, the EMT, kept his voice steady, but I could see the worry in his eyes. They loaded her up, and just like that, she was gone behind ambulance doors. I stood there staring at the bench behind me, the one with my mother's name on a brass plate. That spot was supposed to mean home. Now it was a crime scene. By morning, the blood was gone, power washed clean. The HOA sent out a notice taped to every mailbox, "Incident under review. Community safety maintained." No mention of a taser, no mention of my wife. Just bureaucratic air freshener sprayed over a corpse of truth. But I wasn't the only one who noticed. Mrs. Parnell from 2 doors down whispered, "They did the same thing to my son. Followed him home for a license plate frame." Another neighbor showed me phone footage Marcus wandering through their fenced backyard with a flashlight. I realized it wasn't an accident. This was a pattern. Marcus wasn't rogue. He was protected. So I started digging. I found a buried amendment in the HOA's meeting minutes 2 years old, passed in a closed session with no quorum. Security liaison authorized to enforce policy under board discretion. Board discretion. That phrase was their shield, their license to weaponize a man with no training and no leash. And the woman behind it all was Clarice Temple, HOA president and self-crowned queen of control. She'd turned our bylaws into a personal fiefdom. Then came the fine. A letter taped to my front door. Curb obstruction, community interference, $1,250. They were rewriting the story, painting me as the aggressor, while my wife lay in the hospital wired to machines. I took that letter, sat on my porch, and stared at the sprinklers dancing across the HOA's perfect lawn. That's how they exhaust you with paperwork until you give up. I almost did. For one night I sat beside Amara's hospital bed, watching her chest rise and fall under the monitors, and I asked myself if fighting back would make things worse. If maybe I should just sell the house, disappear quietly. But then she moved her hand barely, weakly, and her fingers found mine. That was my answer. The next day I met Selene Voss, the HOA secretary. She looked nervous, like she expected Marcus to jump out from behind me. When I asked if she knew about the taser, she hesitated. Then she whispered, "He wasn't supposed to have one." That's when the dam cracked. She let me inside her home, paper stacks, minutes, and sticky notes everywhere. "Clarice thinks Marcus keeps the wrong people out," she said. I tried to object. They called me emotional. She poured tea with shaking hands. I asked if she kept records. She nodded. They think I delete them, but I save everything. I gave her my card. If you ever want to stop watching and start acting, I said, call me. She whispered, they'll bury me. I told her, not if I'm standing next to you. That night I built my case. I wasn't filing a complaint, I was drafting an indictment. The next morning I contacted the Virginia Department of Criminal Justice Services. Within hours they confirmed the HOA's neighborhood patrol wasn't registered as any kind of security organization, meaning Marcus Trent's authority was fiction. His car, his badge, decal, his taser, all illegal. The HOA had deputized a civilian under false pretenses. That crossed from misconduct into criminal impersonation, and under Virginia code that carries prison time. I filed a full report with the Attorney General and HUD citing misuse of power, unauthorized enforcement, and discrimination against residents. I attached Lopez's notarized statement and Marcus's patrol photos. That evening I got a call from a blocked number, no words, just silence. I knew what that meant. Someone on the board knew exactly what I'd done. The next morning, more letters. Final warning. Public safety hearing. Conditional occupancy status. That last phrase made me laugh out loud. It wasn't even legal, just a scare tactic written in gold ink. Still, I could feel the noose tightening. Clarice stood in the gazebo that afternoon spinning her version for the neighbors. Disruptive residents can't expect immunity, she said. The irony almost made me smile. She didn't realize I'd already lit the fuse. Then at 6:12 p.m., Selene called. Her voice was shaking. Judge Cross, I found something. She'd pulled a printout from the board's private chat. They joked about Marcus called him HOA SWAT, bragged that he'd keep certain residents in line. And worse, they knew about my wife. Clarice had written, if Trent gets rough again, we'll frame it as unfortunate but necessary. People like Cross don't get to weaponize their status. I remember sitting there in that hospital room reading those words while the fetal monitor beeped beside Amara's bed. I didn't feel anger, just clarity. They thought they could outspin me. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I drove the packet to the AG's field office myself. No email, no courier. I looked the intake clerk in the eye and said, this is internal communication authorizing unlawful force on a pregnant woman. She blinked, then called her supervisor. Within minutes I was in a secure room giving a formal statement. I didn't mention Selene by name, just said, there's a witness. She's scared but ready. They promised escalation to the Civil Integrity Division. When I left, the city was quiet. At Selene's house, her porch light was off. Her HOA badge hung broken from her mailbox. That was her resignation letter. By dawn, the story hit local news: federal judge's family targeted by HOA security. The board panicked. Clarice called an emergency disciplinary hearing. The invitation said I was accused of threatening board personnel. I smiled reading it. They wanted a show. I'd give them one. That Friday, I walked into the clubhouse with a sealed envelope under my arm. Clarice sat behind a folding table draped with the HOA banner, Marcus standing behind her like a soldier without orders. No taser this time. When she saw me, her smile tightened. Mr. Cross, I see you've chosen to attend. Wouldn't miss it, I said, setting the envelope down. Inside you'll find state certification proving your enforcement policy was never filed. HUD's acknowledgement of investigation and the county clerk's statement voiding your amendment. She didn't open it. She raised her voice, trying to sound in control. This hearing is to address escalating misconduct by a resident. I cut her off. No, Clarice. This hearing is evidence of your misconduct. The doors opened behind me. People flooded in. Dozens of neighbors' faces I'd only seen peeking through blinds. Mr. Hahn, Mrs. Parnell, Nadia from down the street. They filled every seat, every corner. Clarice froze. I wasn't aware this was a community meeting. It wasn't, I said, but transparency tends to invite an audience. Then Selene walked in. She didn't go to the board's side, she stood beside me. I have a statement, she said, voice trembling but steady. As acting secretary, I submit records of internal conversations showing deliberate suppression of residents' rights. She laid out printed messages, one highlighted, "Push him until he snaps. A judge losing his cool makes us look stronger." Clarice's face went pale. I leaned forward. "That was sent the morning after my wife was tased." The room fell silent. Even Marcus looked down. You could feel it the moment power cracked. Clarice tried to speak, but Selene removed her badge and dropped it on the table. "I resign," she said. No one clapped. They didn't need to. The silence was louder than any applause. Clarice gathered her papers, but before she could stand, Selene read one final line. Under Article 14, residents may motion for emergency reorganization by majority vote. Clarice whispered, "You have no authority." Selene looked her dead in the eye. "I do. You wrote it." The vote took 15 minutes, 98-4. The board was dissolved on the spot. Clarice walked out through a corridor of neighbors who didn't shout or block her way, but not a single one looked away. Outside, news cameras waited. Inside, the banner that once read Fairbrook Glen HOA hung half-peeled from the wall. And me, I just stood there watching the crowd, listening to the sound of people finally speaking without fear. After weeks of silence, it sounded like freedom. Clarice lost her position. Marcus faced charges for impersonating law enforcement and unlawful use of force. The HOA's insurance withdrew coverage. State and federal audits began rolling out across the region. They wanted to make me kneel. They didn't realize I already knew how to stand. When I think about it now, I still see Amara's hand twitching on that concrete. The flash of light, the sound of her breath leaving. That moment could have broken me. But instead it built something else, a line that won't bend again. I didn't fight them for revenge. I fought them so no one else would have to choose between peace and obedience. Power only exists when people stay silent. The moment you speak, really speak, it collapses.